The impossible truth. The courtroom air crackled with an electricity that could ignite a continent. Every breath held, every gaze fixed, as the man at the epicenter of a financial earthquake, the architect of a fabricated empire, leaned into the microphone. His voice, once a soothing balm to anxious investors, now echoed with a chilling arrogance, a defiant sneer that seemed to challenge the very foundations of reality. "There is no money missing," he declared, his words a direct assault on every analyst, every regulator, every journalist who had dared to whisper the truth. "The funds are simply ... in transit." The collective gasp that rippled through the gallery was almost palpable, a wave of disbelief crashing against the unshakable self-assuredness of a man accused of orchestrating one of the most audacious financial frauds in modern history. This wasn't just a statement, it was a gauntlet thrown down, a final, desperate gamble to maintain the illusion, to cling to the fantasy that had captivated an entire nation and ensnared global markets. Outside, the world held its breath. Billions of euros vanished. A corporate titan once lauded as Germany's answer to Silicon Valley, teetering on the brink, and at its heart, a man who, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, dared to deny the undeniable. The tension was suffocating. You could feel the weight of shattered trust, the sting of betrayed hope, the quiet fury of those who had poured their life savings into a mirage. This was not merely a dispute over numbers. It was a battle for narrative, a struggle for the very definition of truth in an age of manufactured realities. The man on the stand, Markus Braun, formerly the CEO of Wirecard, looked out at a world that had once worshipped him as a visionary, now ready to condemn him as a charlatan. His claim, delivered with such unwavering conviction, was designed to silence the critics, to sow doubt, to reassert control over a narrative that was rapidly unraveling. But beneath the surface of his bravado, the cracks were already forming. The carefully constructed edifice of Wirecard, a fintech marvel that had promised limitless growth and defied all conventional financial wisdom, was showing its true colors. The in-transit excuse was not a revelation. It was a desperate echo of a lie repeated too many times, a flimsy veil over an abyss of debt and deception. The silence that followed his declaration was not one of acceptance, but of stunned anticipation. Because what happened next, what unfolded in the ensuing moments, was not just the collapse of a company, but the public execution of a lie. Was a confrontation that ripped away the facade, exposed the rot beneath, and fundamentally changed how Germany and indeed the world would ever again view the glittering promises of unchecked ambition. This was the moment the fake billions finally met their reckoning, and the consequences would reverberate for years to come. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. In the grand theater of finance, where fortunes are forged and empires crumble, every epic showdown requires its protagonists, the figures whose clash defines the narrative, whose very presence embodies the opposing forces at play. In the dramatic unraveling of Wirecard, these roles were cast with a clarity that bordered on archetypal, setting the stage for a confrontation far more significant than a mere legal battle. On one side, the relentless methodical force of truth, personified by the figure of Don McCrum. He was not a flashy orator, nor a political operative seeking the spotlight. Instead, McCrum was a journalist, but not just any journalist. He was a financial investigator for the Financial Times, a publication renowned for its rigorous, often unyielding pursuit of financial integrity. His was a quiet dedication, born not of a desire for viral fame, but from a deep-seated belief in the accountability of power and the sanctity of accurate reporting. McCrum was the quintessential hero in this narrative, not because he possessed superhuman strength, but because he embodied an almost old-world commitment to facts, to evidence, to peeling back the layers of deception no matter how formidable the opposition. His background was one of meticulous research, of countless hours spent poring over balance sheets, cross-referencing footnotes, and sifting through mountains of data that most would dismiss as tedious minutiae. He understood that the devil, and often the truth, resided in those precise, often overlooked details. McCrum represented the unwavering pursuit of reality, the inconvenient truth that powerful institutions often desperately try to suppress. He was the quiet storm, the persistent drip that eventually wears away the stone, armed only with a pen and an unshakable resolve to expose what was hidden. His authenticity was his greatest weapon. There was no pretense, no agenda beyond the truth. He was the quiet, determined force, the embodiment of journalistic integrity, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to be bored, and refusing to be silenced. For years he had been meticulously building his case, not with dramatic pronouncements, but with painstaking accumulation of incontrovertible facts. He was the classic underdog, armed with intellect and integrity against a Goliath of corporate might and political influence. He stood for the quiet, diligent work that underpins genuine journalism, a stark contrast to the performative theatrics of his adversary. He represented the inconvenient truth that finance, despite its complexity, is ultimately built on trust and verifiable numbers, not on smoke and mirrors. Opposite him, bathed in the harsh glare of public scrutiny, stood Markus Braun. If McCrum was the quiet, analytical hero, Braun was the flamboyant, almost theatrical villain. His very persona exuded an arrogant charisma, a cultivated image of a visionary tech mogul who had defied the staid conventions of German industry. Braun was not merely a CEO. He was a showman, a master of illusion, who had crafted an intricate narrative of Wirecard as Germany's shining star, a fintech titan destined to conquer the world. He was the archetypal antagonist, not necessarily because he reveled in malice, but because his actions were driven by an unbridled ambition, a narcissistic belief in his own genius that allowed him to rationalize monumental deceptions. His background was rooted in technology and a seemingly meteoric rise, but beneath the veneer of innovation lay a deep-seated contempt for scrutiny and an almost pathological aversion to transparency. He reveled in the adoration of investors, the fawning headlines, the political endorsements that solidified Wirecard's place as a national champion. Braun represented the dangerous allure of unchecked ambition, the seductive power of a grand narrative, and the chilling ease with which a charismatic figure can convince an entire ecosystem, from regulators to politicians to the general public, to suspend disbelief in the face of incredible claims. His theatricality was not just a personality trait, it was a deliberate strategy. He used bombastic statements, confident pronouncements, and an aura of technological superiority to deflect criticism and paint anyone who dared question Wirecard as a Luddite or a malicious short seller. He was the embodiment of hubris, convinced that his intelligence and the perceived complexity of Wirecard's business model would forever shield him from the mundane realities of accountability. Braun cultivated an image of a fearless disruptor, someone challenging the old guard, and in doing so, he fostered an almost cult-like following among those who wanted to believe in Germany's answer to Silicon Valley. He positioned himself not just as a businessman, but as a prophet of a new financial era. Unburdened by traditional rules, his public appearances were carefully choreographed performances, designed to project an image of calm authority even as the ground beneath his feet but began to crumble. He spoke in sweeping generalizations, avoiding specifics, and when pressed, would resort to vague references to proprietary technology or complex international payment flows. For years, this strategy had worked, not just because he was convincing, but because there was a widespread desire, especially within Germany, for a homegrown tech success story. Wirecard was that story, and Braun was its captivating narrator. He capitalized on national pride, subtly suggesting that any skepticism was a form of betrayal, an attack on Germany's economic future. He was a master manipulator of perception. They are able to turn accusations into endorsements, and critical inquiries into evidence of a conspiracy against his burgeoning empire. He surrounded himself with enablers, individuals who either believed his vision unconditionally or were too deeply entrenched in the illusion to question it. Braun's confidence was infectious, lulling even seasoned investors and regulators into a state of complacency. He understood the power of belief, and he leveraged it to perfection, constructing a narrative so compelling that it overshadowed any inconvenient facts. The clash between these two men, the quiet, persistent truth-seeker and the bombastic, illusion-weaving showman, was destined to be epic. It was a confrontation not just of individuals but of philosophies. McCrum represented the foundational principles of verifiable reality, the necessity of rigorous checks and balances, and the often unglamorous work of exposing fraud. He was the embodiment of the idea that facts, however inconvenient, ultimately prevail. His motivation was simple: to report the truth, regardless of the consequences or the power of those he was investigating. He had no personal vendetta, only a professional commitment to journalistic integrity. He pursued the story with a quiet tenacity, an almost scientific detachment, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. He understood that in the world of finance, an unverified number, a phantom transaction, could unravel an entire economy. His meticulousness was often mistaken for obsession by Wirecard's defenders, but it was, in fact, his greatest strength. He built his case brick by painstaking brick, ensuring that each piece of information was independently verified, each claim cross-referenced. He was a master of the financial labyrinth, capable of tracing the invisible threads of money through offshore accounts and complex corporate structures. McCrum's quiet demeanor belied an iron will and a profound understanding of how complex financial fraud operates, relying on layers of obfuscation and the sheer audacity of the lie. He knew that the bigger the lie, the more people were willing to believe it, especially if it aligned with their hopes and desires. His goal was to expose the mechanics of that illusion, not just to point fingers. Braun, conversely, was a product of an era where narrative could often trump reality, where a charismatic pitch could secure billions, and where skepticism was often dismissed as negativity. He was the embodiment of the fake-it-till-you-make-it mentality taken to its most dangerous extreme. His arrogance stemmed from years of unchallenged success, a belief that he was simply smarter than everyone else, capable of pulling off a grand deception under the very noses of the financial establishment. He represented the intoxicating danger of unchecked power, the cult of personality in the corporate world, and the systematic erosion of trust that occurs when truth is sacrificed at the altar of boundless ambition. His strategy was to constantly be on the offensive, to discredit critics, to attack their motives, and to rally supporters around a narrative of external aggression against a German success story. He understood the power of an us versus them mentality, framing any legitimate inquiry as a conspiratorial attack by shadowy forces. He used litigation threats, public smears, and political lobbying to silence his detractors, creating an environment where questioning Wirecard became professionally hazardous. Braun projected an image of effortless genius, always a step ahead, always with an answer, even if that answer was a fabrication. He was a master of misdirection, drawing attention away from the core financial discrepancies by focusing on tangential successes or future promises. He believed that the sheer scale of the lie, once established, would be too large for anyone to genuinely challenge, especially with so many influential players invested in Wirecard's continued success. His charisma was not merely a personal trait, it was a carefully honed tool, used to mesmerize investors and politicians alike, convincing them to overlook the glaring red flags in favor of the tantalizing promise of exponential growth. He was the modern-day charlatan, not with elixirs and snake oil, but with abstract financial products and the alluring promise of technological revolution. This dynamic, the quiet investigator against the flamboyant deceiver, the meticulous truth against the captivating illusion, formed the foundational tension of the Wirecard saga. It was a battle fought not with fists, but with spreadsheets, press releases, and courtroom testimonies. It was a clash that would determine not only the fate of a multi-billion-euro company but also the very definition of financial integrity in the digital age. The stage was set for a monumental takedown, a reckoning that would expose the dark underbelly of unchecked ambition and the enduring power of investigative journalism. The audience, both then and now, was desperate to see who would emerge victorious in this epic struggle between fact and fiction, between authenticity and artifice. The hero, armed with nothing but the truth, was about to face the villain, shielded by a fortress of lies and an army of enablers. The collapse of Wirecard was never merely the unraveling of a single company, nor was it simply a financial scandal confined to the intricate world of balance sheets and audits. No, this was a seismic event, a catastrophic implosion that sent shockwaves far beyond the stock market, reaching into the very heart of national identity and global trust. This was a battle for the soul of German finance, a desperate fight to preserve the nation's pristine reputation for economic rigor and corporate integrity. For decades, Made in Germany was a global hallmark of quality, precision, and unwavering reliability, a brand built on meticulous engineering and transparent business practices. Wirecard, however, threatened to shatter that carefully constructed image to expose a vulnerability, a blind spot that allowed an audacious fraud to flourish under the very noses of its celebrated regulatory bodies and financial institutions. The stakes were monumental. This wasn't just about a few billion euros vanishing into thin air. It was about the credibility of an entire economic system. It was about whether Germany, a global powerhouse and a paragon of stability, could truly hold its corporations accountable, or if it was susceptible to the same kind of dazzling deceptions that had plagued other financial hubs. The saga became a litmus test for the nation's ability to police its own, to protect its investors, and to maintain its standing on the world stage as a bastion of responsible capitalism. Every accusation against Wirecard, every damning piece of evidence uncovered by Don McCrum and the Financial Times, chipped away not just at the company's facade but at the very bedrock of Germany's economic prestige. The world watched, not just with morbid curiosity, but with a critical eye, questioning whether the German financial watchdog, BaFin, had been too slow, too complacent, or even too complacent in allowing Wirecard's spectacular ascent despite persistent red flags. Moreover, the Wirecard scandal represented a deeper, more insidious struggle, the fight between old-world diligence and the intoxicating, often unregulated promise of the digital age. Wirecard branded itself as a futuristic fintech disruptor, a symbol of Germany's entry into the cutting-edge world of online payments and technological innovation. It was embraced by politicians and investors alike as a national champion, a testament to Germany's adaptability in a rapidly changing global economy. To question Wirecard then was often perceived as questioning Germany's future, its ability to compete with Silicon Valley giants, to embrace the new while shedding the perceived baggage of the old. This narrative created a powerful shield around Markus Braun and his company, making it incredibly difficult for dissenters, including journalists and short sellers, to be heard. They were often dismissed, even vilified, as unpatriotic or as saboteurs attempting to undermine a national success story. This wasn't merely a business dispute, it was a cultural clash, a tension between the traditional German values of caution and thoroughness and the modern imperative for rapid growth, bold innovation, and a willingness to take risks. Wirecard promised the latter, seemingly delivering. incredible returns with unprecedented speed, and in doing so, it tapped into a collective desire for Germany to be at the forefront of the technological revolution. The scandal, therefore, threatened to expose the dangerous consequences of prioritizing image and ambition over fundamental financial probity. It raised uncomfortable questions about whether the desire for a German Google or a German Amazon had blinded authorities and investors to the most basic principles of financial oversight. The very notion of trust, so central to commerce and international relations, was on the line. If a company lauded as a national champion, overseen by respected German institutions, could so thoroughly deceive, what did that say about the reliability of the entire system? The ramifications extended to every German company seeking international investment, every regulatory body striving for credibility, and every investor looking for a safe haven. The Wirecard saga became a crucible, testing the very resilience of an economic philosophy that had long prided itself on stability and prudence. It forced a painful introspection within Germany, prompting agonizing questions about how such a colossal fraud could have flourished, not for weeks or months, but for years, under the gaze of seemingly sophisticated financial watchdogs and auditors. The sheer audacity of the deception, the way it systematically exploited loopholes and manipulated perceptions, laid bare a profound vulnerability in the system designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. It wasn't just a corporate failure. It was a systemic failure, raising profound doubts about the effectiveness of oversight mechanisms that were once considered among the most robust in the world. This wasn't just a case of corporate malfeasance. It was a profound blow to the collective psyche. Germany had always viewed itself as an economic bastion, a model of fiscal responsibility and industrial excellence. The idea that a company, one of its own supposed champions, could be built on a foundation of such intricate lies was deeply unsettling. It was a narrative that threatened to redefine Germany's economic identity, not as an unshakable fortress of reliability, but as a potential breeding ground for sophisticated financial trickery. The implications were chilling. If Wirecard could pull off such a grand illusion, what other hidden dangers lurked beneath the surface of seemingly legitimate enterprises? The faith of ordinary citizens, who had invested their hard-earned savings, and the trust of international partners, who relied on Germany's economic stability, were both severely shaken. The confrontation, therefore, transcended the narrow confines of a courtroom or a newsroom. It became a proxy battle for transparency against obfuscation, for accountability against impunity, and ultimately, for truth against a carefully constructed fiction. The quiet, relentless pursuit of facts by a solitary journalist, pitted against the immense resources and political connections of a multi-billion-euro corporation, was a modern David and Goliath story playing out on a global financial stage. The stakes were nothing less than the erosion of trust in an age where information and misinformation could spread with unprecedented speed. It was about proving that even in the face of overwhelming power and entrenched interests, the truth, however inconvenient or painful, could still ultimately prevail. The battle over Wirecard wasn't just about recovering lost funds. It was about reclaiming a sense of integrity, about demonstrating that even the most elaborate corporate charade could not withstand the relentless glare of forensic investigation. It became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that innovation, while vital, must always be tethered to unwavering ethical standards and robust regulatory oversight. The confrontation promised to deliver a definitive answer to the question that haunted so many: could the powerful be held accountable, or would the glittering promise of unverified wealth continue to blind entire nations? This was the moment, the turning point where the accumulated lies of years would either continue to hold sway or finally shatter, exposing the raw, uncomfortable truth for all the world to see. The entire global financial community held its breath, recognizing that the outcome of this showdown would redefine not just the future of German finance, but the very principles of trust in the modern economy. That moment had finally arrived. Years of meticulous investigation, a relentless pursuit of elusive facts, and a barrage of attacks from a powerful corporate adversary culminated in this singular, explosive confrontation. The world, or at least the significant part of it that cared about the integrity of global finance, held its collective breath. Markus Braun, the seemingly unassailable CEO of Wirecard, sat opposite those who dared to question his empire, radiating a familiar aura of calm defiance. His strategy had always been consistent: deny everything, discredit the accusers, and paint any skepticism as a malicious conspiracy by short sellers intent on destroying a German success story. This time, however, the stage was different. The pressure immense, and the opposition armed not with speculation, but with irrefutable proof. The initial offensive, as expected, came from Braun's side, a carefully orchestrated counter-narrative designed to reassert control and sow doubt. Through his legal team and carefully placed media statements, the antagonist launched his flawed attack. It wasn't a direct assault on facts, but a more insidious one, an attempt to muddy the waters and shift the blame. They spoke of sophisticated, short-selling attacks and market manipulation orchestrated by shadowy figures, They claimed that the Financial Times, and by extension Dan McCrum, were merely pawns in a larger scheme to bring down Wirecard for financial gain. Braun himself, in prepared statements and through his lawyers, reiterated the narrative of a thriving, innovative company being unfairly targeted. He pointed to Wirecard's past successes, its soaring stock price, and the endorsement of prestigious financial institutions and political figures. The message was clear. Wirecard was a victim, not a perpetrator. The missing money was not missing. It was merely misallocated or subject to administrative delays in complex international payment processing networks. These were not direct denials of a crime, but rather an attempt to contextualize away the damning evidence, to spin every red flag into a minor operational hiccup. The attack was characterized by its theatricality and lack of concrete refutation. Instead of presenting verifiable evidence to counter the allegations, they relied on bluster, legal threats, and a narrative of victimhood. They invoked patriotism, subtly suggesting that those who questioned Wirecard were undermining Germany's economic prowess. There were threats of defamation lawsuits against journalists and critics, attempts to intimidate and silence anyone who dared to publish dissenting views. They pointed to auditor sign-offs, regulatory approvals, and analyst recommendations as proof of Wirecard's legitimacy, conveniently ignoring the fundamental issues that investigative journalists like McCrum had been highlighting for years. Braun's defense was not about proving his innocence with evidence, but about overwhelming the opposition with noise, legal threats, and a barrage of counter-accusations. He projected an air of indignant disbelief, as if the very idea of Wirecard being anything but a triumph was ludicrous. He leaned into the narrative that critics simply didn't understand Wirecard's complex business model, implying that their skepticism stemmed from ignorance rather than legitimate concerns. He framed the narrative as an attack on innovation, a Luddite resistance to progress, but this time the usual tactics of obfuscation and aggression failed to land their intended blow. The ground had shifted. The years of tireless work by Don McCrum and his team at the Financial Times had laid the groundwork for the inevitable takedown. McCrum had been accumulating the receipts for years, not just isolated pieces of information, but a meticulously woven tapestry of evidence, each thread reinforcing the next. His approach was calm, methodical, and devastatingly effective. He didn't resort to theatrics. He let the facts speak for themselves. The takedown began not with a dramatic pronouncement, but with the systematic step-by-step presentation of irrefutable proof. First came the data. McCrum, through sources and painstaking analysis, presented comprehensive financial data that directly contradicted Wirecard's official figures. These weren't just discrepancies. They were gaping holes. He showed how Wirecard's declared revenues from third-party acquiring businesses, particularly in Asia, simply did not reconcile with the actual transaction volumes of the partners they claimed to be working with. He exposed phantom clients and inflated figures, demonstrating how revenue growth was being artificially manufactured on paper. He presented detailed spreadsheets, anonymized but verifiable, that illustrated the systematic exaggeration of profits and the creation of entirely fictitious business operations in obscure parts of the world. The numbers spoke for themselves, starkly contrasting with the rosy picture painted by Wirecard's financial statements. This wasn't guesswork, it was forensic accounting, revealing inconsistencies that no amount of spin could explain away. Then came the documents. McCrum had obtained internal Wirecard documents, some leaked, some discovered through diligent research, that directly contradicted public statements. These included internal emails discussing questionable accounting practices, contracts with supposedly major clients that showed suspiciously low or non-existent activity, and even records of transactions that appeared to be circular, designed to move money between Wirecard's subsidiaries and partners to create the illusion of legitimate revenue. There were corporate presentations showing wildly different figures internally than those released externally, revealing a deliberate effort to mislead investors. These documents were the smoking guns, paper trails of deception that directly implicated senior management. They weren't just anomalies. They were patterns of fraudulent activity, clear indications of a systematic scheme to inflate revenues and conceal losses. The presentation of these documents was not a theatrical reveal, but a sober, devastatingly precise dissection. Each document, projected for all to see, chipped away at Braun's carefully constructed narrative, exposing the layers of artifice. There were copies of dubious bank statements, allegedly from Asian trustee accounts, that purported to hold billions of euros, but were later revealed to be forgeries. McCrum presented expert analysis of these documents, detailing the inconsistencies, the amateurish errors, and the outright fabrications that proved their inauthenticity. The sheer volume and consistency of these contradictory documents made it impossible for Braun and his team to simply dismiss them as isolated incidents or errors. They painted a clear picture of an internal machinery of deception, meticulously crafted and sustained for years. Crucially, McCrum also brought forth past statements and pronouncements made by Markus Braun himself and by other senior executives. These were the receipts in their most damning form, the very words of the accused, now used against them. He contrasted Braun's confident declarations of billions in liquid assets held in trustee accounts with the mounting evidence that no such funds existed. He played recordings of investor calls where executives reassured analysts about the solidity of their Asian operations, even as internal documents suggested those operations were largely fictitious. He highlighted press releases touting massive verifiable deals that, upon closer inspection, turned out to be either severely exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Each quote, each clip, served as a direct indictment, showcasing the blatant hypocrisy and the deliberate, calculated nature of the deception. The juxtaposition of their public statements with the grim reality revealed in the documents was chilling. It wasn't just a matter of poor judgment or accounting errors. It was a carefully constructed web of lies spun directly by those at the helm. The takedown was methodical, relentless, and utterly devoid of emotion, making it all the more powerful. McCrum didn't engage in shouting matches or personal attacks. He simply presented the facts, one after another, allowing the weight of the evidence to crush the opposition. He explained, with a calm clarity, how Wirecard had allegedly used a network of opaque third-party acquirers in places like Dubai and Singapore to funnel money and inflate transaction volumes, creating the illusion of a booming business where little actual activity existed. He detailed how trustee accounts supposedly holding billions of euros for Wirecard, accounts that had been the cornerstone of their claims to financial health, were, in reality, either empty or non-existent. He meticulously traced the flow of imaginary money, demonstrating how it was conjured into existence on paper, then vanished, leaving a trail of fabricated numbers and shattered investor confidence. The calm delivery amplified the devastating impact of each revelation. It was the antithesis of Braun's theatricality, a stark contrast between fact and fiction. McCrum's approach was that of a surgeon, dissecting the layers of fraud with precision, revealing the diseased organs beneath the glossy corporate skin. He showed how Wirecard had allegedly created a shadow economy within its own operations, a world of phantom partners and ghost revenues, designed solely to deceive auditors and investors. He detailed the intricate network of shell companies and intermediaries that Wirecard supposedly used, exposing them as conduits for illusion rather than legitimate business. Each piece of evidence was not just a standalone point, but part of a larger coherent narrative of fraud. The room grew heavy with the weight of the undeniable. The air, once crackling with Braun's defiant energy, was now thick with the silence of impending doom. Every slide, every document, every audio clip presented by McCrum was a nail in Wirecard's coffin, driven in with clinical precision. It became clear that this was not a dispute over interpretation. It was a revelation of outright fraud, meticulously executed and daringly sustained for far too long. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, too consistent, too irrefutable. It wasn't just a few anomalies. It was a systemic pattern of deception. Reaching to the very top, the antagonist's confident facade began to crack, not with a sudden implosion but with a gradual, agonizing erosion. The defiant sneer faltered, replaced by a strained expression of disbelief. Then perhaps, finally, a flicker of dawning realization. The carefully constructed narrative of victimhood of a company under malicious attack crumbled under the relentless assault of verifiable facts. The very essence of Wirecard, the core of its alleged business model, was shown to be a mirage, a financial Potemkin village built on an elaborate network of lies. This was not a debate. It was an execution of a myth, a public dismantling of a corporate fantasy. The scale of the deception, revealed in agonizing detail, was breathtaking. McCrum single quotes his presentation systematically dismantled every single one of Braun's earlier claims. When Braun had declared, "There is no money missing. The funds are simply in transit," McCrum responded with bank statements that showed accounts either empty or containing fractions of the claimed billions. He presented sworn affidavits from former Wirecard employees and partners who corroborated the fraudulent practices, detailing how they were instructed to fabricate transactions and create false invoices. These were not anonymous sources, but individuals willing to put their names to their testimony, further solidifying the credibility of the claims. The human element of these testimonies added a layer of devastating impact, showing the real-world consequences of the deception and the complicity of individuals within the company. He meticulously laid out how Wirecard had allegedly inflated its cash balances through a process known as round-tripping, where money was cycled through various shell companies and partners to create the illusion of legitimate revenue and robust cash flow. He used diagrams and clear explanations to demystify these complex financial maneuvers, making the fraud understandable to a broader audience, demonstrating that even sophisticated accounting trickery was ultimately just a variation of a simple lie. He highlighted instances where auditors had raised red flags internally, only to have their concerns dismissed or overridden by Wirecard management, revealing a systematic obstruction of oversight. The sheer audacity of the deception was laid bare, showing how the company had not merely cooked the books, but had, in essence, created an entirely fictitious financial universe, One of the most devastating pieces of evidence involved the alleged non-existence of a significant portion of Wirecard's purported business in Asia. Macron presented satellite imagery, property records, and local business registrations that showed the supposed partners and subsidiaries were either tiny, known offices or entirely fictional entities. He revealed that the vast majority of Wirecard's claimed third-party acquiring business, the very engine of its supposed growth, was a phantom, existing only on paper. This wasn't just accounting fraud. It was an elaborate, global charade involving physical locations and business operations that simply did not exist in the scale claimed. The scope of this deception was staggering, revealing a company that had built its entire valuation on a house of cards. The sheer volume of proof was overwhelming. There was no single point of failure. Rather, it was a systemic, multifaceted fraud woven into the very fabric of the company's operations. Macron demonstrated how the company had exploited a lax regulatory environment, an eager investor base hungry for tech success, and a network of complicit or negligent auditors to perpetuate its scheme for years. He painted a picture of a company where the line between legitimate business and elaborate fiction had not just blurred, but entirely dissolved. The story wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the culture of deception that had festered within Wirecard, a culture that incentivized fraud and punished dissent. The silence in the room as each piece of evidence was presented was deafening. There were no outbursts, no dramatic interruptions from Braun or his legal team. The carefully constructed edifice of lies was collapsing, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating sound of truth being unveiled. The audience, once captivated by the drama of Braun's defiance, was now mesmerized by the cold, hard facts. You could almost feel the collective realization dawning. This wasn't just a corporate hiccup or an accounting error. This was fraud on an epic scale, meticulously planned and executed. The weight of evidence was so immense that it became physically palpable. A suffocating blanket of undeniable truth settling over the proceedings. The takedown reached its zenith when Macron presented evidence of the direct involvement of high-ranking Wirecard executives, including Braun himself, in orchestrating the deception. This wasn't just about negligence or a failure of oversight. It was about active participation in a criminal enterprise. He revealed communications that showed a clear intent to mislead, to fabricate, and to obscure the truth from auditors and investors. These were not circumstantial findings. They were direct, unambiguous proofs of culpability at the highest levels. The meticulous accumulation of such evidence meant that there was no room left for plausible deniability. The narrative that Wirecard was a legitimate company under attack was shattered beyond repair. The final hammer blows came with the revelation of the full scale of the missing funds. While Braun had infamously claimed the money was in transit, Macron presented concrete evidence that the 1.9 billion euros simply did not exist. He showed how the supposed trustee banks had denied holding the funds, how the alleged accounts were either fabricated or contained minuscule amounts, and how the entire concept of the trustee model that Wirecard had relied upon to justify its enormous cash balances was a deliberate smokescreen. This wasn't a matter of accounting error. It was a pure, unadulterated disappearance of money that was never there to begin with. The fiction had finally run headlong into the brick wall of reality. The contrast between the antagonist's confident, almost dismissive stance at the beginning and his increasingly desperate silence as the evidence mounted was stark. His earlier bravado, his attempts to deflect and discredit, now seemed pathetic in the face of such overwhelming facts. The air of invincibility that had once surrounded him evaporated, replaced by the grim pallor of a man caught in his own trap. He had banked on the complexity of his scheme, the difficulty of tracing phantom money, and the power of his public image to shield him. But Macron, with his methodical approach, had painstakingly peeled back every layer of the onion, revealing the rotten core. The Takedown was a masterclass in investigative journalism and forensic analysis. It demonstrated the enduring power of truth, even against the most formidable and well-funded adversaries. It wasn't about flashy arguments or emotional repeals. It was about the meticulous, undeniable presentation of facts that left no room for doubt. The sheer audacity of Wirecard's fraud, combined with the relentless determination of those who exposed it, created a moment of profound revelation. The financial world witnessed not just the collapse of a company, but the public dismantling of a meticulously crafted lie, a lie that had deceived an entire nation and ensnared global investors. This wasn't just a victory for a journalist. It was a victory for the principle of accountability, a testament to the fact that even in an age of manufactured realities and pervasive misinformation, verifiable truth can still prevail. The confrontation served as a stark reminder that beneath the glittering promises of technological disruption and exponential growth, the fundamental rules of finance, transparency, integrity, and verifiable assets remain non-negotiable. The image of Markus Braun, once the embodiment of Germany's digital future, now stripped bare of his illusions by the relentless force of facts, became a potent symbol of corporate hubris, brought crashing down by journalistic diligence. The final moments of the confrontation were not marked by a dramatic outburst, but by the quiet, crushing weight of undeniable proof, leaving no doubt about the sheer scale of the deception and the catastrophic consequences that were soon to follow. The curtain had fallen on the grand illusion, and the harsh glare of reality exposed the true nature of Wirecard's fake billions. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was not a gradual fading but a violent explosion, a detonation of truth that ripped through the global financial landscape. The meticulous takedown, delivered with such cold precision by Don McCrum and the Financial Times, left no room for doubt. The revelations about Wirecard's phantom billions, the fabricated revenues, and the non-existent Asian operation spread like wildfire, igniting a furious inferno of public outrage and institutional panic. The total victory was not just a legal or journalistic one, it was a societal reckoning, a cathartic release of pent-up anger and disbelief. Social media became an instant epicenter of this digital earthquake. Twitter, in particular, erupted with a ferocity rarely seen outside of major geopolitical events. Hashtags like #WirecardFraud, #BrownGone, and #Germany Scandal immediately trended worldwide, each carrying the collective fury and astonishment of millions. Users, from seasoned financial analysts to ordinary retail investors who had lost their life savings, flooded the platforms with expressions of disbelief, anger, and bitter irony. One viral tweet from a prominent financial commentator with millions of followers read so: "The next German tech champion was literally built on thin air. Billions vanished, and the CEO thought in transit would cut it. You can't make this up." #WirecardFraud, #financial crime. This tweet alone garnered hundreds of thousands of retweets and likes, serving as a rallying cry for the disillusioned. Another, more poignant post from a small-time investor stated, "My retirement savings gone, all because I believed the hype and ignored the red flags. The regulators failed us. Wirecard is a betrayal." #BrownGone, #betrayed by Wirecard. This resonated deeply, reflecting the personal devastation wrought by the corporate deception. Memes depicting Markus Braun as a magician pulling empty hats, or as Icarus flying too close to the sun with wings of forged bank statements, proliferated instantly, serving as both a form of collective catharsis and a potent symbol of his spectacular fall. The sheer volume and speed of the online reaction underscored the profound shock and anger felt across all demographics. Financial forums, Reddit threads, and YouTube comment sections became virtual war zones, dissecting every detail of the fraud and demanding accountability from all involved parties, not just Wirecard but also its auditors, regulators, and political enablers. The digital echoes of the takedown were deafening. The mainstream media, initially cautious and often criticized for not being aggressive enough in questioning Wirecard, now joined the chorus with a vengeance. Headlines screamed from every major newspaper and financial publication across the globe, painting a picture of total collapse and widespread institutional failure. Germany's reputation, once synonymous with precision and reliability, was now being openly questioned. Invented headlines included Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Wirescam, Germany's Silicon Dream crumbles in billions-euro fraud. Financial Times, Wirecard, the full unraveling how years of deceit came to light. The Wall Street Journal, European fintech star Wirecard plunges into scandal as billions go missing. Der Spiegel, Das Märchen ist AOC's, Wirecard's betrayal rocks German economy. The fairy tale is over. Wirecard's betrayal rocks German economy. Bloomberg, Wirecard's in-transit billion-euro bluff exposed as global fraud. These headlines, bold and unambiguous, reflected the seismic shift in narrative. No longer was Wirecard portrayed as a misunderstood innovator. It was now unequivocally labeled a fraudulent enterprise. News channels ran continuous coverage, dedicating entire segments to animated graphics explaining the complex web of shell companies and phantom transactions. Expert commentators, many of whom had previously defended Wirecard or remained silent, now lined up to express their shock and condemn the systemic failures that allowed the fraud to persist. The tone was one of collective betrayal and deep embarrassment for the German financial establishment. Analysts who had issued buy ratings on Wirecard stock faced intense scrutiny, their credibility questioned in the harsh light of the revelations. Markus Braun's career, once glittering with the promise of tech superstardom, collapsed with a speed and finality that was breathtaking. The man who had once commanded adoration and instilled fear was now a pariah, stripped of his power, his image, and his freedom. Within hours of the full scale of the fraud being undeniable, he was arrested. The news footage showed him, no longer the defiant visionary, but a somber, defeated figure, being led away by authorities. His resignation from Wirecard, initially presented as a voluntary step, was clearly forced, a desperate attempt to mitigate the fallout that ultimately failed. The company itself swiftly filed for insolvency, a spectacular downfall for a firm that had been valued at over 20 billion euros just months prior. The personal consequences for Braun were immediate and severe. His carefully cultivated public persona, built on an image of technological genius and unwavering confidence, disintegrated into that of a convicted swindler. His wealth, once astronomical, was now subject to asset freezes and forfeiture proceedings. His name became synonymous with corporate malfeasance, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. His fall from grace was absolute, public, and irreversible. The implosion of Wirecard dragged down with it not only Braun but also several other key executives who were either arrested or fled, facing international warrants. The ripple effect. That was devastating. Auditors, most notably Ernst & Young, who had signed off on Wirecard's accounts for years despite glaring red flags, faced unprecedented scrutiny, class action lawsuits, and a severe blow to their own reputations. Regulators, particularly BaFin, found themselves under immense political pressure and public condemnation for their perceived inaction, their slow response, and their apparent inability to detect and prevent such a massive fraud on their own soil. Investigations were launched into their oversight, with promises of sweeping reforms and greater vigilance. The scandal exposed deep systemic flaws, suggesting that the very watchdogs designed to protect the market were either outmaneuvered, complacent, or even influenced by Wirecard's political connections. The protagonist, Dan McCrum, and the Financial Times emerged from the wreckage, not just vindicated, but hailed as heroes of investigative journalism. Their relentless pursuit of the truth, often against significant legal threats, public smears, and intense corporate pressure, was lauded globally. McCrum, who had faced accusations of market manipulation and unpatriotic behavior from Wirecard and its allies, was now celebrated as a beacon of integrity. The narrative had flipped entirely. What was once seen by some as a malicious attack on a national champion was now unequivocally recognized as courageous, vital reporting that exposed a colossal crime. The Financial Times circulation and online engagement soared, a testament to the public's renewed appreciation for rigorous, independent journalism in an era of rampant misinformation. McCrum's quiet, persistent demeanor throughout the years-long battle made his triumph all the more resonant. It was a victory not of bluster, but of meticulous, undeniable fact. The aftermath also triggered a wave of desperate attempts by various entities to distance themselves from Wirecard. Politicians who had previously championed the company now issued statements condemning the fraud and demanding thorough investigations. Investment banks that had facilitated Wirecard's funding rounds and analysts who had maintained positive ratings scrambled to justify their past endorsements. The entire ecosystem that had enabled Wirecard's rise was now under intense scrutiny, forced to confront its own complicity, whether through negligence, willful blindness, or active participation. The scandal became a catalyst for wider discussions about corporate governance, auditor independence, and the effectiveness of financial regulation in an increasingly complex and globalized market. The sense of profound satisfaction for those who had followed the saga, especially those who had been skeptical of Wirecard's claims for years, was immense. It was the ultimate vindication of skepticism, the triumph of painstaking fact-finding over glossy PR and corporate spin. The public appetite for justice was palpable, and while the legal battles would drag on for years, the immediate, undeniable collapse of Wirecard and the public shaming of its architects provided a deep sense of resolution. It proved that even the most elaborate, seemingly untouchable deceptions could ultimately be brought down by persistent truth-telling. The story of Wirecard became a modern-day fable, a stark reminder that the laws of gravity, both financial and ethical, always eventually applied. The total victory was not merely the company's collapse, but the definitive unmasking of the lie, and the reassertion of fundamental principles of financial integrity. The very infrastructure of financial reporting and auditing in Germany, and indeed across Europe, faced a brutal reckoning. Calls for stricter regulations, enhanced auditor accountability, and greater powers for financial watchdogs grew deafening. The Wirecard scandal wasn't just a blip, it was a watershed moment that exposed systemic vulnerabilities and ignited a furious debate about how to prevent such a monumental fraud from ever happening again. The German government, once a staunch supporter of Wirecard, found itself in an embarrassing position on the international stage, forced to explain how one of its national champions had turned out to be a criminal enterprise operating under its nose. This necessitated rapid, decisive action to restore trust and demonstrate a commitment to financial probity. The legal fallout continued for months and years. Lawsuits against Wirecard's former management, auditors, and even regulators mounted, seeking billions in damages for defrauded investors. Criminal proceedings against Markus Braun and his alleged co-conspirators began, promising a lengthy and complex legal battle that would further unravel the intricate details of the fraud. The very concept of corporate due diligence was redefined, as investors and financial institutions became hyper-vigilant, scrutinizing claims with a level of skepticism that had been tragically absent during Wirecard's meteoric rise. The reverberations were felt across the global financial sector, forcing a revaluation of how fintech companies were audited and regulated, and prompting a deeper look into complex international payment processing networks that had historically operated with limited oversight. The public discussion shifted dramatically, moving from awe at Wirecard's perceived success to outrage at its deep-seated corruption. Media houses launched dedicated investigations into the roles played by various enablers, from the venture capitalists who poured money into the company without sufficient scrutiny, to the PR firms that aggressively spun Wirecard's narrative, to the analyst who seemingly ignored all warning signs. The focus was no longer just on Braun and the company, but on the entire ecosystem that had allowed such a massive deception to thrive. This broadened investigation highlighted the uncomfortable truth that fraud often thrives not just due to a single perpetrator, but due to a multitude of actors turning a blind eye, driven by greed, complacency, or fear of powerful interests. The scandal became a masterclass in how a combination of ambitious corporate narrative, lax oversight, and aggressive suppression of dissent can create a perfect storm for monumental financial crime. The sense of total victory also stemmed from the clear societal message delivered that even the most powerful, seemingly untouchable corporate figures can be brought to justice. For years, Wirecard had seemed invincible, shielded by its political connections, its booming stock price, and its aggressive legal tactics against critics. The collapse proved that persistent evidence-based journalism, combined with growing public and institutional pressure, could eventually pierce through the strongest corporate defenses. It was a powerful affirmation of the role of a free press in holding power accountable, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The vindication of the Financial Times and Dan McCrum was not just a win for journalism, it was a victory for transparency. A powerful argument for the necessity of independent scrutiny in a world increasingly susceptible to corporate spin and manufactured realities. The story of Wirecard's downfall became a permanent fixture in business, school curricula, case studies in financial fraud, and a stark warning for future generations of entrepreneurs and investors. It underscored the fundamental principle that true innovation cannot be built on a foundation of lies, and that sustainable growth always requires genuine transparency and verifiable assets. The public had witnessed a real-time dismantling of a corporate myth, a fascinating and terrifying demonstration of how quickly billions could be conjured and then vanish. This wasn't just a news story, it was an epic financial drama played out on the global stage, with real money, real livelihoods, and real reputations at stake. The depth of the fraud, its global reach, and the sheer audacity of its perpetrators captivated the world, ensuring its place as one of the most significant financial scandals of the 21st century. The triumph of truth was palpable. The air was clear of the corporate spin and the aggressive counter-narratives that had clouded the judgment of so many for so long. What remained was the stark, undeniable reality of a company built on a colossal lie, now reduced to rubble. The satisfaction was rooted not in Schadenfreude but in the restoration of a fragile but essential belief that ultimately facts matter, and that those who seek to profit from deception will eventually face their reckoning. The fallout for Wirecard was not just financial, it was reputational, legal, and systemic. The company and its former leaders became synonymous with corruption and betrayal, their names etched into the annals of financial infamy. The victory was comprehensive, leaving no room for alternative narratives or lingering doubts about the true nature of Wirecard's spectacular rise and even more spectacular fall. The total victory was crystallized in the legislative and regulatory reforms that began to take shape in the wake of the scandal. German lawmakers initiated probes into the weaknesses of their financial oversight bodies, leading to promises of overhauling BaFin, the financial watchdog, and strengthening auditing standards. There was a renewed focus on corporate governance, with discussions centered on making boardrooms more accountable and independent. The scandal served as a critical wake-up call, forcing a powerful economy to confront uncomfortable truths about its own regulatory apparatus and the susceptibility of its institutions to sophisticated fraud. It sparked a broader European debate about cross-border financial oversight, recognizing that in an interconnected global economy, a fraud in one country can have devastating ripple effects across the continent and beyond. The public discourse permanently shifted. Before Wirecard, the narrative around fintech often revolved around disruptive innovation and limitless potential, sometimes with the glossing over of traditional financial controls. Post-Wirecard, a much healthier skepticism emerged. Investors, journalists, and regulators alike became more wary of companies with opaque business models, rapid unexplained growth, and aggressive responses to legitimate questions. The too good to be true adage gained renewed, profound relevance. The very idea of a company achieving meteoric success while simultaneously claiming its business was too complex for outsiders to understand became a flashing red light instead of a badge of honor. The total victory extended to the moral sphere as well. The Wirecard scandal became a testament to the fact that integrity, even when unpopular and difficult, ultimately triumphs over deception, no matter how brilliantly executed. It reinforced the notion that while charisma and clever manipulation might sway public opinion for a time, they cannot withstand the relentless assault of verifiable facts. The story served as a powerful validation for whistleblowers, for dissenting voices, and for investigative journalists who often work in obscurity. facing immense pressure and ridicule but whose tireless efforts are essential to the functioning of a transparent society. It proved that the system, while flawed and susceptible to abuse, can ultimately self-correct when individuals and institutions remain committed to the truth. The image of Markus Braun, once a titan of industry, now stripped of his power and facing years in prison, became the enduring symbol of Wirecard's absolute defeat. His fall from grace was a stark public spectacle that left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The carefully constructed edifice of his public image, meticulously built over years of charm and deception, crumbled into dust under the weight of incontrovertible evidence. The total victory was not about retribution, but about the restoration of order. The reaffirmation that while ambition and innovation are crucial, they must always be tethered to ethical conduct and transparent practices. The Wirecard saga became a timeless lesson, a modern-day Greek tragedy of hubris, deception, and the inevitable, crushing force of truth. The world watched as the fake billions finally met their undeniable total reckoning. The spectacular collapse of Wirecard, a saga riddled with ambition, deceit, and an eventual undeniable reckoning, offers far more than just a captivating tale of financial fraud. It serves as a potent, timeless lesson, a universal fable for the digital age, echoing ancient warnings about the dangers of unchecked hubris and the enduring power of truth. At its core, the Wirecard story is a stark reminder that even in an era captivated by technological disruption and the promise of exponential growth, the fundamental principles of finance remain immutable. Numbers must add up, assets must be verifiable, and claims, however grand, must be grounded in reality, not fantasy. The most profound moral of this story is the absolute imperative of authenticity and transparency. Wirecard built its empire on a foundation of meticulously crafted illusions, a business model so opaque that even its own auditors struggled to penetrate it. Markus Braun, the company's charismatic architect, projected an image of a visionary, a disruptor beyond the comprehension of traditional finance. This narrative, however compelling, was ultimately a dangerous distraction, a veil behind which monumental fraud was orchestrated. The lesson is clear: when a company's story becomes more important than its verifiable facts, when complexity serves to obscure rather than innovate, it is a flashing red light. True innovation thrives on clarity, not obfuscation. Authentic success is built on tangible assets and real revenue, not on phantom billions in transit. The saga underscores that integrity is not a negotiable luxury but the bedrock of sustainable enterprise. Any institution, any individual, that prioritizes image over substance is destined for a fall. Secondly, the Wirecard scandal is a powerful testament to the enduring power of diligent, independent scrutiny. For years, critical voices, particularly investigative journalists like Don McCrum, raised alarms about Wirecard's dubious financials. They faced intense pressure, legal threats, and public disparagement, often dismissed as cynical short sellers or unpatriotic. Yet, their persistence, their meticulous fact-checking, and their unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth ultimately brought down a multi-billion-euro edifice of lies. This highlights the indispensable role of a free and vigilant press in holding power accountable, whether that power resides in government or in corporate boardrooms. It teaches us that skepticism, especially towards claims that seem too good to be true, is not cynicism, but a vital safeguard. The story champions the unglamorous, painstaking work of forensic investigation over the seductive allure of glossy headlines and unchecked ambition. It's a powerful affirmation that truth, however inconvenient or delayed, has a way of finding its light, especially when brave individuals refuse to be silenced. Furthermore, the Wirecard collapse serves as a critical lesson in systemic accountability. The fraud was not merely the work of a few rogue individuals. It was enabled by a network of complacent auditors, slow-moving regulators, and politicians eager to champion a perceived national success story. The story forces a crucial introspection into the vulnerabilities of oversight mechanisms and the dangers of groupthink within financial ecosystems. It underscores that trust in markets is not built solely on the honesty of individual actors, but on the robustness of the systems designed to enforce transparency and integrity. The moral here is that vigilance must extend beyond corporate walls. It must encompass the entire regulatory and auditing infrastructure. When watchdogs fail to bark, or when they are deliberately silenced, the consequences can be catastrophic, eroding public trust and undermining the very stability of the financial system. It's a call to action for stronger independent auditing, for regulators with greater powers and willingness to act decisively, and for a political environment that prioritizes ethical conduct over national pride in business ventures. Finally, and perhaps most poignantly, the Wirecard story is a cautionary tale about the seductive allure of believing what you want to believe. Many investors, analysts, and even seasoned professionals desperately wanted to believe in Wirecard. They wanted a German tech success story, a rival to Silicon Valley. This collective desire, this yearning for a particular narrative, sometimes that led to a dangerous suspension of disbelief, an overlooking of obvious red flags in favor of the tantalizing promise of exponential returns. The moral is a timeless one. Never let ambition or wishful thinking blind you to the cold, hard facts. Financial decisions, indeed all critical decisions, must be based on verifiable evidence, not on hype, charisma, or nationalistic fervor. Wirecard scandal serves as a stark reminder that even the most brilliant illusions eventually dissipate under the harsh glare of reality, and that the biggest lies often demand the most painful truths. It is a powerful affirmation that while the pursuit of wealth is a natural human endeavor, it must always be pursued within the bounds of honesty and rigorous verification, for the sake of individual investors and the stability of the global economy. What an unbelievable journey we've just taken, through the dizzying heights of corporate ambition and the devastating depths of financial fraud. The Wirecard saga isn't just a news story, it's a testament to the power of truth and the ultimate cost of deception. Now, we want to hear from you. What was the most shocking revelation in the Wirecard scandal for you? Do you believe enough has been done to prevent a similar fraud from happening again, or are there still vulnerabilities in the global financial system? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights and opinions are what make this community so incredibly valuable. And if you found this deep dive into one of history's most compelling financial showdowns as gripping as we did, please hit that like button, share this video with anyone who needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Don't miss out on any of our future investigations into the most explosive political and financial confrontations shaping our world. What other untold stories of power, corruption, and defiance should we uncover next? Tell us in the comments. And speaking of untamed empires and the forces that bring them down, if you thought the Wirecard saga was intense, wait until you uncover the truth behind the secret war on Binance, how the US government took down richest man for years. Changpeng Zhao CZ was the untouchable king of crypto, building a multi-billion-dollar empire and seemingly laughing in the face of global governance. But behind the scenes, a secret war was brewing. Discover how a single fatal phrase in an internal company chat triggered the downfall of a titan. See the irrefutable proof that federal agents gathered for years, and witness the final showdown that ended in a crushing defeat and a staggering $4.3 billion fine. This is more than a story about crypto. It's an epic saga of power, hubris, and what happens when the digital world's boldest player collides with the most powerful nation on earth. Prepare to see the story the headlines never told you. Click the card on your screen right now to dive into that explosive confrontation.